It's never the big, dramatic moments you miss. It's the little stuff. For me, it's the specific weight of a full house. The floorboards groaning under the happy shuffle of a dozen different conversations. The clink of ice in glasses. The warm, savory cloud of roasting garlic and rosemary that always seemed to hang in the air. My house was always full. I made sure of it. Friends from work, neighbors from down the street, my sister's ever-changing roster of quirky artist friends, Liam's buddies from school and their parents. They all congregated at my place. I was the hub, the planner, the one who sent out the group texts and remembered who was gluten-free and who couldn't stand cilantro. I've always been that person, the one who gathers people. After my divorce from Mark, that instinct went into overdrive. The world felt so quiet and empty then. Just me and my 10-year-old son Liam rattling around in a house that suddenly felt cavernous. The silence was an accusation. So I filled it. I filled it with people, with laughter, with life. For Liam. I wanted him to grow up surrounded by a sprawling, messy, loving family, even if its members weren't all related by blood. I wanted him to feel anchored, to know that there was a whole network of people who had his back. It was my mission to build a fortress of community around him, a wall of warmth and connection so thick that no loneliness could ever seep through. But it wasn't just for Liam, if I'm being truly honest. A few years ago, a distant cousin of my mother's, a man I'd only met a handful of times, named Arthur, passed away. He was a wanderer, a man who collected passport stamps instead of friends, always chasing a new horizon. He felt ill in his small, anonymous apartment in the city where no one knew his name. He was found a week later by the building manager who noticed the smell. The story, delivered in my mother's hushed, sorrowful tones over the phone, didn't just sadden me. It burrowed into my soul and laid something cold and heavy there. I became obsessed with the image of him, dying alone, in a silent room, with no one to hold his hand, no one to even know he was gone until it was too late. The sheer absolute isolation of it terrified me on a primal level. That's the real ghost that haunts my house. Not some specter in a white sheet, but the chilling specter of being forgotten. Every party I threw, every potluck I organized, it was a ritual. It was me, standing in the doorway, defiantly shouting into the void that the people in my life were seen. They were known. They were loved. They would never be an Arthur. I wouldn't let them. My home was more than a house. It was a sanctuary. A promise that no one in my orbit would ever have to face the darkness alone. I thought the greatest tragedy was to be alone when you die. I was wrong. There's a different kind of loneliness, a far more terrifying one. It isn't the quiet of an empty room. It's the silence you feel when you're looking into the eyes of someone you've known your whole life and see a stranger looking back. It's the chilling realization that the person you're sharing a memory with isn't actually remembering it. They're just accessing it like a file on a computer. The horror isn't a monster with claws and fangs. It's a monster that wears your best friend's face, knows your deepest secrets, and uses them to get closer to the next person on its list. It's a predator that doesn't just kill you, it hollows you out, stealing your warmth, your connections, your very essence, and then uses your skin as a costume to walk among the people you love. My greatest strength, the beautiful, vibrant community I had so carefully built, was also my greatest vulnerability. I had gathered all my favorite people into one place, under one roof. I didn't know it at the time, but I hadn't built a fortress. I had set a buffet, and something ancient and ravenously hungry had just received an invitation.
The first tremor, the first sign that the ground beneath my feet was unstable, came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a phone call from Sarah, my best friend since college, the godmother to my son. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for a focaccia, my hands dusted with flour. Her name flashed on the screen, and I answered on speaker, propping the phone against the spice rack. "Hey, you," I said, punching down the dough. "To what do I owe the honor?" There was a pause, just a fraction of a second too long. "Maria," she said, and her voice was flat. It was her voice, her exact pitch and tone, but it was missing the usual warmth, the musical lilt I knew so well. It was like a perfectly synthesized but soulless imitation. "I have a question for you. If this house caught on fire, and you could only save one person, not including Liam, who would it be?" I stopped kneading. The question was so bizarre, so out of character. "What? Sarah, are you okay? That's a morbid thing to ask." I tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous puff of air. "I'm serious," she said, her voice still unnervingly monotone. "Who is the most important person to you in that circle you've built?" The clinical way she said "that circle you've built" sent a shiver down my spine. It sounded like an outsider's observation, not a term a member would use. "I don't know, Sarah. That's a horrible question. Everyone is important. I have to go." The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, my flour-dusted hands frozen over the dough, the silence of the kitchen pressing in on me. An hour later, I called her back, my heart still thumping with a strange anxiety. "Hey," she answered, her voice instantly, blessedly normal. "Sorry I missed your call. I was in the shower. What's up?" When I asked her about her earlier call, her morbid question, she sounded genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? I haven't called you all day. Must have been a butt dial, I guess." I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to dismiss it as a weird fluke, a technical glitch, anything other than what my gut was screaming it was. But the seed of unease had been planted. That Friday, I hosted a small dinner party. Just my inner circle, Sarah and her husband, my sister, a couple of other close friends. I needed to see her, to look her in the eye and reassure myself that everything was fine. For the first hour, it was. She brought a bottle of my favorite Pinot Noir, hugged me tightly at the door, and immediately started teasing my sister about her latest disastrous date. It was Sarah, the real Sarah. The relief was so profound, it almost made me dizzy. I was being paranoid, letting my own anxieties run wild. But as the night wore on, the little inconsistencies started to appear, like tiny cracks in a perfect porcelain facade. She was telling the story of our backpacking trip through Spain after graduation, the one where we missed our train and ended up sleeping on a park bench in Barcelona. She got every detail right. The surly police officer, the stale croissants who shared for breakfast, the way I'd cried with a mixture of fear and laughter. Everyone was captivated, laughing at all the right moments. But as I watched her, I realized her smile was just a shape her mouth was making. It didn't crinkle the corners of her eyes the way it always did. Her laugh, a sound I knew better than my own, was perfect in its mimicry, but hollow, lacking the genuine, breathless mirth I knew so well. It was a perfect performance, but a performance nonetheless. Later, she got up to help me carry dishes to the kitchen. I watched her walk away, and a cold dread trickled down my spine. There was a subtle hitch in her step, a slight, almost imperceptible drag in her right foot that wasn't there before. I knew her body, her movements, the way a person knows their own reflection. I knew about the faint scar above her brow from a childhood's fall, and the way she absent-mindedly twisted her hair when she was nervous. This walk, this ever so slight imperfection in her gait, was wrong. It was a discordant note in a familiar melody, and it made the whole melody feel menacing. Everyone left around midnight. Sarah was the last to go. She hugged me at the door, her arms wrapping around me with the same familiar pressure as always. "Thanks for a great night, Em. You're the best." Her words were perfect, the sentiment was perfect, but I felt a deep, instinctual revulsion, a desperate need to pull away. I forced a smile, watched her walk down the driveway to her car, and closed the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stood in the hallway, the silence at a house finally returning, but this time it wasn't comforting. It was menacing. My gaze fell upon the entry rug where she left her sandals, a pair of simple leather slip-ons that she always wore in the summer. I bent down to move them, to put them away, so I wouldn't trip over them in the morning. The porch light cast a pale yellow glow through the sidelight window, illuminating the worn leather and the faint imprint of her feet. And that's when I saw it. My breath hitched, trapped in my lungs. It felt like plunging into icy water. There, on the imprint of her right foot, was the distinct, unmistakable outline of a sixth toe. Small, nestled tightly against the others, but undeniably present. I dropped the sandals as if they were red hot. My mind flashed back through 2 decades of friendship, summers at the beach, shared locker rooms, lazy afternoons painting each other's toenails as teenagers. I knew her feet, as well as I knew my own. And I knew, with a soul-crushing certainty that drained all the warmth from my body, that Sarah Manning had 5 toes on each foot. The thing I had just hugged, the thing that had eaten my food and laughed in my home, was not my best friend. The hunt hadn't just begun. It was already inside my walls.
Sleep didn't come that night. How could it? I sat in the dark of my living room, the sandals still lying accusatorily on the floor by the door, and I stared out the large picture window into the quiet suburban street. The world outside was peaceful, draped in the soft glow of streetlights. Inside me, a storm of panic and disbelief was raging. I must have been mistaken. It was a trick of the light, a smudge on the rug, my overactive imagination, fueled by stress and a couple glasses of wine. I kept repeating these rationalizations, my voice a frantic whisper in the silent house. But the cold knot of terror in my stomach only tightened. Just as I was about to convince myself to get up and throw the damned sandals in the trash, to erase the evidence of my own apparent insanity, a movement across the street caught my eye. A figure emerged from the deep shadows between 2 houses. It was Sarah, or the thing that looked like Sarah. It was wearing the same clothes from the party, and it just stood there on the edge of my neighbor's lawn, staring at my house. My blood turned to ice. It didn't move like a person waiting for someone. It was unnaturally still, like a statue. And then it smiled. It was a slow, deliberate stretching of the lips, a wide, predatory grin that was utterly devoid of warmth. It was the smile of something that knows it has you trapped. As I watched, frozen in a paralysis of pure terror, it tilted its head. The motion wasn't human. It was too sharp, too quick, and it went too far. An audible series of cracks echoing across the silent street like twigs snapping. Its neck was now at an impossible broken angle, yet its eyes, glinking in the streetlight, remained locked on my window, on me. The smile never wavered. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I just sat there, a small, trapped animal, as the chilling realization washed over me. It knew that I knew. The days that followed were a waking nightmare of paranoia. I tried to act normal for Liam, making him breakfast, helping with his homework, reading to him at night, all while a silent scream was clawing its way up my throat. I avoided calls from Sarah. They came every day, her name flashing on my phone, a constant, terrifying reminder. I'd stare at it until the ringing stopped, my hand shaking too badly to decline the call. The local news started reporting a strange uptick in missing persons cases in the surrounding towns. People who just vanished. A college student who never made it home from the library. A young couple who went for a hike and never came back. Each report was a fresh wave of cold dread. I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that their disappearances were connected to the thing wearing my best friend's face. I was losing my mind, caught between the impossible truth and the desperate need for a rational explanation. I called Tom, Sarah's husband, my hands slick with sweat as I dialed. I just wanted to hear his voice, to have him tell me that Sarah was sick, that she was acting strangely, anything to ground what was happening in reality. But his voice was calm, normal. "Sarah's great," he'd said, a little too cheerfully. "We're actually thinking of hosting a barbecue this weekend. You and Liam have to come." The invitation felt like a threat. The thought of being in their home, of seeing them together, sent a jolt of panic through me so strong it made my teeth ache. I made a flimsy excuse and hung up, my heart pounding. I was alone in this. No one would ever believe me. I would sound like a lunatic. My carefully constructed world, my fortress of community, had become my prison. Every familiar face was now a potential mask for a monster. I knew I couldn't live like this, suspended in a state of constant, low-grade terror. I had to know. I had to face it, one way or another. It was a desperate, foolish plan born of sleep deprivation and fear, but it was the only one I had. I called Sarah and Tom and invited them for dinner. Just the three of us. My voice was a stranger's, high and thin, but I managed to sound convincing. "I feel like we haven't had a proper chance to catch up," I'd said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Liam's at a sleepover. It'll be a quiet night." The point of no return. As I prepped the meal, my hands moved on autopilot, chopping vegetables, seasoning a roast, my mind a million miles away. My home, once a beacon of warmth and welcome, felt alien and hostile. The scent of Christmas spices from a simmering pot of mulled cider on the stove was sickly sweet, a cloying perfume trying to mask the rot underneath. When the doorbell rang, I nearly dropped my knife. I opened the door to see them standing on my porch, silhouetted against the festive lights of my neighbors. They were a perfect picture of a happy suburban couple. Sarah was wearing a red sweater, and Tom had his arm around her. They smiled, and their smiles were perfect imitations of my friend's affection. But their eyes were all wrong. They were too still, too wide, like the glass eyes of a doll, reflecting the Christmas lights with a flat, lifeless quality. There was no depth, no history, no soul behind them. They stepped inside, and the temperature in the house seemed to drop. They moved with the synchronized, practiced grace that was unsettling. Tom looked exactly like the man I'd known for a decade, right down to the little scar on his chin from a college rugby match. But his movements were too precise, too economical. He sat on the couch without the usual sigh of a man relaxing after a long week. He just placed himself there. We made small talk through dinner. They recounted memories we shared with perfect accuracy, yet it was like listening to a recording. There were no hesitations, no fumbling for words, no genuine spark of emotion. The silence between their sentences was heavy, expectant. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I set my fork down, my hand trembling. "Who are you?" I whispered, the words barely audible. They both stopped eating and looked at me. Their smiles didn't falter, but something in their eyes shifted, a flicker of cold, ancient intelligence.
"We are her," the thing in Sarah's body said, its voice still a perfect copy. "We are him," the other added. "We are everything they were." They explained their hunger, not for flesh, but for what they called essence, the intricate web of relationships, memories, and emotions that make a person. They saw my gatherings not as parties, but as feasts. They saw me as a curator. And then they made their offer. It wasn't a threat, not really. It was a business proposition. "You are a nexus," the Tom thing said, its head tilted slightly. "You gather. You create the sustenance we require. Continue to do so, and you and the boy will remain untouched. You will be a shepherd for your flock. A very, very dear friend." They would spare me and Liam. In return, I would become their Judas goat, leading my friends, my family, my community to the slaughter. I looked from one unblinking, soulless beast to the other, and in the reflection of their dead eyes, I saw the ghost of Arthur, my cousin, dying alone. And I understood my choice. I could let Liam die, or I could become the architect of a loneliness so profound, so absolute, it would swallow the world I had built. I agreed. What other choice was there? The next 2 weeks were a blur of festive preparation that felt like arranging flowers on a coffin. I planned the biggest Christmas party of my life. I sent out over 150 invitations. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, parents from Liam's school, everyone I had ever gathered under my roof. My house became a stage for the coming massacre, decorated in cheerful reds and greens that seemed to mock me. The scent of pine from the towering Christmas tree in the living room mingled with the metallic ting of fear that never left my mouth. Every carol I heard, every twinkling light I saw, was a note in a funeral dirge. Liam was ecstatic, buzzing with the excitement of the coming holiday, blissfully unaware that our home had become a hunting ground. I watched him decorate gingerbread men, his small hands carefully placing gumdrop buttons, and I felt a piece of my soul wither and die. I was saving him, but I was damning everyone else, my flock. The creatures, my silent partners, were patient. They didn't visit, they didn't call, but I felt their presence constantly, a cold weight on my soul, a silent promise of the horror to come. They had taken others in our town. I knew it. Mark, my ex-husband, called one afternoon, his voice strained. "Have you heard from the Hendersons? No one's seen them in a week." The Hendersons, they had been at my last dinner party. A cold, sick feeling washed over me. I was already a shepherd. The night of the party arrived, cold and clear. Snow dusted the trees, and my house blazed with light, a picture-perfect Christmas card. And the lambs came. They arrived in droves, laughing, carrying bottles of wine and plates of...
My heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. I had to end this. It wasn't just about saving the people who were left. It was about reclaiming some tiny, shattered piece of my own soul. My gaze landed on the magnificent 12-foot Christmas tree dominating the living room. It was laden with ornaments, wrapped in hundreds of twinkling lights, its multicolored wires snaking across the floor to a power strip near the rain-streaked window. An idea, wild and suicidal, sparked in the darkness of my mind. I found the Tom thing and the Sarah thing standing near the fireplace, observing the thinning crowd with the placid satisfaction of well-fed predators. I walked towards them, my legs shaking. "There are more," I said, my voice hoarse, "in the wine cellar. Some special vintages I was saving." I saw a flicker of interest in their dead eyes. Greed. Their insatiable hunger was their only weakness. I led them away from the party, through the kitchen, and down the narrow hallway that led to the back of the house.
I could feel the remaining guests' eyes on us, their cheerful chatter a surreal soundtrack to my final desperate act. I led them not to the cellar, but to the secluded sunroom at the very back of the house, where the massive Christmas tree stood. The rain had started, beating a steady rhythm against the glass roof. I pointed towards a dark corner. Just behind there. As they moved past the tree, their backs to me, I lunged for the thick electrical cord. With a guttural scream born of guilt and grief, I yanked. The tree swayed, a giant in its death throes, ornaments shattered, tinkling like broken bells. It crashed down with a deafening roar, pinning them both beneath its massive weight. For a second, there was only the sound of splintering wood and their surprised grunts. Then I grabbed the pitcher of water I'd left on a nearby table and hurled it at the power strip where the lights were plugged in. The world exploded in a flash of blue-white light. The air crackled, smelling of ozone and burning pine. The creatures convulsed violently, their human masks melting away in the searing electrical current, revealing something black and shifting and utterly alien beneath. Their screams were not human. They were a high-frequency shriek that vibrated in my bones, a sound of pure cosmic agony. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The lights in the house went out, plunging us into darkness, the only illumination coming from the dying, flickering embers of the fire in the living room. The shrieking stopped. There was only the sound of the rain and the stunned, terrified silence of my remaining guests.
I don't remember much of the immediate aftermath, just flashes. The smell of burnt plastic and cooked meat. The wide, horrified eyes of my friends staring at the blackened, twisted things tangled in the wreckage of the tree. The eventual arrival of sirens, their red and blue lights painting the walls in frantic, strobing patterns. I sat wrapped in a blanket on my front steps, watching the controlled chaos, feeling nothing. Empty. The fortress had fallen, the flock was scattered and decimated. I had failed in my most sacred duty. After the police and paramedics left, a few of my closest remaining friends stayed, trying to offer comfort, their words a meaningless buzz in my ears. Eventually, they too departed, leaving me in the wreckage of my home and my life. Liam, who had been shielded from the worst of it by my sister, came and sat beside me on the cold, damp bench in the backyard. He slipped his small hand into mine. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly. His touch should have been comfort, the one pure thing left in my world. But I felt nothing. My gaze drifted downwards to where his sneakers rested on the wet grass. The lace on his right shoe was untied, and there, peeking out from the edge of his sock, I saw it, the small yet unmistakable sixth toe, a perfect tiny replica of the one I had seen in the imprint of Sarah's sandal. A coldness so absolute, so profound, it felt like death itself, spread through my veins. I slowly looked up from his foot to his face. He was looking at me with a concerned expression, his head tilted, and in a voice that was not his own, a voice I hadn't heard in years but recognized with soul-shattering clarity, the dry, reedy voice of my forgotten cousin Arthur. He asked, "Why are you crying, Maria? No one is alone here."
Did that story make your skin crawl? That's just a taste of what's lurking. Show your support by liking and subscribing. We're all in this together to survive the next spine-chilling story.